What if the most powerful book on earth didn't begin on earth? What if its first words were spoken not by man, but by an unseen voice that tore open the veil between heaven and dust? A whisper older than time itself, carried down through light and fire, echoing across the void. For 14 centuries, this book has been recited, memorized, feared, and loved, yet few have ever heard its true story, how it descended, how it survived, how it rewrote the fate of humanity. Hidden within its verses lies a trail of secrets guarded, silenced, and now, finally uncovered. Tonight we open what was sealed. We step into the darkness of a mountain cave where the air trembles with revelation. The moment when heaven spoke and a man who could not read began to change the world. This is not just the history of a book. It is the story of a voice, the voice that still speaks. The year was 610 CE. Mecca, a city of trade and idols, a desert throne where the gods of stone ruled the hearts of men, and above it the sky burned with a light no eye could see. It was the month of Ramadan. But on that night, Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power, time itself seemed to hesitate. The world waited. The angels waited. It is said that the 18,000 realms of creation stood still in reverent silence. Then, without sound or warning, a command rippled across the unseen. The veil between heaven and earth was torn open. From the eternal tablet Al-Law al-Mahfuz descended a pulse of pure command, rushing downward through layers of light until it struck the mountains of Arabia. And there, inside a lonely cave called Hira, a man sat in stillness. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, a man who had turned his back on the chaos of Mecca, its idols, its greed, its hollow prayers. For months he had sought the silence of the cave, seeking the voice behind creation, searching for something he could not name. But on this night, silence broke. The air grew heavy, thick, alive. A tremor coursed through the stones. The darkness began to breathe. Then came the light, unbearable, absolute, flooding the chamber. And from within it, a presence. A voice neither human nor earthly spoke a single word. Iqra, read. Muhammad froze. His heart pounded like thunder. "I cannot read," he whispered. The presence drew closer. The air collapsed under its power. Again, Iqra. The command was not a request. It was a force. The angel embraced him not with tenderness, but with the weight of the cosmos. His chest tightened. His breath vanished. And from that crushing pressure, a voice thundered through the universe. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of blood. Read, and your Lord is the most generous who taught by the pen. Taught man what he did not know." The first verses of Surah Al-Alaq. 5 sentences that tore open history. The heavens and the earth reconnected for the first time in centuries. The covenant between the Creator and His creation was renewed, and revelation once again walked among men. But to Muhammad it felt like the world was ending. The light receded, leaving behind a silence that roared. He stumbled out of the cave, gasping for breath, his body trembling under the residue of something far beyond mortal endurance. As he descended Mount Hira, the world itself seemed to whisper. Every rock, every tree, every gust of wind called out to him, "Peace be upon you, O messenger of God." He ran faster. The stars above shimmered not in beauty, but in recognition. For the first time since Moses, since Jesus, heaven had spoken directly to the earth. By the time he reached Mecca, the night had become still again, but nothing in creation was the same. He burst into his home, eyes wild, heart racing. "Cover me," he said. Khadijah wrapped him in a cloak, holding him as his body shook. She saw not madness, but awe, the fear of a man who had touched eternity. He whispered what had happened, the voice, the light, the unbearable command. Khadijah's eyes glistened. "Allah will never abandon you," she said softly. "You feed the hungry, you shelter the orphan, you speak the truth. This is not the voice of madness, it is the call of destiny." Outside Mecca slept beneath its 1,000 idols, unaware that its gods had just fallen. Inside one man sat in silence, a prophet in waiting. In the unseen realms, angels assembled their wings, spanning the horizon. for the message had begun, and with it the final conversation between heaven and mankind. This was not the end of an age. It was the dawn of one. As the prophet closed his eyes, the echo of that command lingered in the night air, a word that would transform empires, reshape knowledge, and outlive every civilization that would come after. Iqra, read. A single command, the spark that lit 14 centuries of faith, art, science, and revelation. But this was only the beginning, because what descended that night was not just a message, it was a revolution written in the language of eternity. And before long, that revolution would shake the world itself. He ran through the desert night, the air tearing against his lungs, the sand cold beneath his feet. Behind him, Mount Hira stood like a dark monument to the impossible. The words still thundered in his skull. Read, in the name of your Lord who created. The stars seemed to whisper his name. Even the stones around him murmured, "Peace be upon you, O messenger of God." But he did not feel peace. He felt terror, awe, the unbearable weight of having been touched by the infinite. By the time he reached his home, his breath was gone, his body trembling. He burst through the door and fell into the arms of his wife. Cover me, he cried. Khadijah, the woman who had loved him before the world knew his name, wrapped him in a cloak. She could feel his heart racing through the fabric. For a long time, there was only silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. He told her what he had seen, the light, the voice, the command that burned through his chest. He feared he had lost his mind, that something holy and terrible had entered him. But Khadijah's reply was steady, glowing with conviction. "No," she said. "By Allah, He will never abandon you. You are kind, you are honest. You care for the orphan, you feed the hungry. This is not madness, my beloved. It is the call of heaven." That night she became the first believer. And in that quiet home, the first flame of Islam was lit not with swords, but with faith. Days passed. The silence returned. Then, in the stillness of dawn, the voice came again. This time the words were different. "O you who are wrapped up, arise and warn." The world shifted once more. The trembling man in a cloak became the messenger. The mission had begun. Khadijah, wise and courageous, sought the counsel of her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal. He was a scholar of the earlier revelations, a man who read both the Torah and the Gospel, one of the last remaining monotheists in Mecca. When he heard Muhammad's account, the old man's face turned pale. His eyes widened and he whispered as if to himself, "This is Namus al-Akbar, the same angel who came to Moses and to Jesus. You, O Muhammad, have been chosen. But beware, your people will rise against you. They will call you mad, a liar. They will harm you, exile you, perhaps even seek your death." The words struck like lightning. Prophethood was not a crown, it was a cross to bear. Muhammad sat in silence, the weight of destiny pressing down upon him. The revelation was not a comfort, it was a fire meant to reshape the world. From that night on, sleep rarely came. When he closed his eyes, the voice of heaven returned. The cave of Hira was gone, but the message continued to descend drop by drop, verse by verse, until his very soul became its vessel. Each revelation came with force, shaking his body, breaking his breath as if his heart was being rewritten by divine ink. He would sweat in the cold, tremble under the unseen weight, and then speak each word crisp, unshaken, perfect. And those words once uttered could never be forgotten. In those early days, revelation descended like lightning and left silence in its wake. He would sit for hours afterward, motionless, listening to the echo fade. Sometimes he would look to the horizon and see the same being again, Gabriel not as a man, but filling the sky from east to west, wings, stretching like the vault of heaven. It is said that even the stars bent their light when he appeared, but not all encounters brought light. Between each revelation came long pauses, days of silence that felt like abandonment. In those moments, he feared the presence would never return. He feared he had been forgotten. Yet it was in those silences that his faith deepened. The waiting became worship. The absence became proof of trust. One night as he stood beneath the desert sky, the stars blazing above, he whispered to the emptiness, "If I am truly chosen, then make me strong enough to bear it." And the answer came not in thunder, but in peace. He felt it, the quiet promise of his Lord. With hardship comes ease, with fear comes faith. From then on, the trembling stopped. The man who once feared the light now walked in it. He understood the revelation was not only for him, it was for all who had forgotten who they were. Every verse was a mirror for mankind, showing them their origin, their purpose, their end. In the streets of Mecca, the idols still stood tall, but in one house under one roof, a truth had been born that would outlive them all. He was no longer just Muhammad, the merchant of Mecca. He was Al-Rasul, the messenger, and the fire that began in a cave was about to spread across the earth. The heavens had spoken, but soon the earth would answer. The world had changed, yet no one knew it. The revelation that descended on one man now burned quietly beneath the skin of Mecca, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. No banners were raised, no armies formed, only whispers. Whispers that carried a light so fierce it could not be contained. For 3 years, the prophet's call remained hidden. He spoke only to those whose hearts he already knew, the kind, the seekers, the ones who had long grown weary of the idol's silence. Among them was Khadijah, steadfast in her faith. Ali, the young cousin whose eyes carried both innocence and courage. Zayd ibn Haritha, the freed servant who chose loyalty over blood. And Abu Bakr, the merchant whose wealth was shadowed only by his devotion. They were the first to whisper the words that shattered empires, La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. It was not rebellion they sought, it was truth. Yet even truth can be dangerous in a city built on lies. At night they met in silence in the courtyard of Khadijah's home, or deep within the valley of Al-Arqam. The faint glow of oil lamps cast trembling shadows across their faces as verses fell upon them like rain. By time, surely man is in loss except those who believe and do good and encourage truth and encourage patience. Each revelation was more than poetry, it was command. And with every verse, the world of Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance, began to tremble. The idols still stood upon their stone pedestals, but their dominion had already cracked. The Quraysh, proud and unchallenged for centuries, began to sense something stirring beneath their feet. A rumor, a gathering, a whisper of unity in a city divided by blood and gold. One night as they prayed in secret, a footstep echoed outside. The room froze. Every breath held captive. Through the narrow doorway, the flicker of a shadow, a Quraysh spy. The prophet raised his hand in silence. They waited. The shadow passed. The danger was gone, but the message was clear. What was once peaceful faith was now a threat to power. Still, they did not stop. They could not. Faith had taken root too deeply to be uprooted. When Abu Bakr heard the prophet speak, he said without hesitation, "This is the truth." And with his voice came others. He went out by day, speaking quietly to those he trusted. Before long, Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and Zubair ibn al-Awwam entered the fold. The secret circle grew still small, but glowing like embers under ash. Every new believer meant risk loss of family trade protection, yet none withdrew. At times, verses came down that sounded like warnings to the believers themselves. Do not think you will enter paradise without being tested as those before you were tested. They understood. Faith was not a shield from suffering. It was the ability to stand through it. The prophet taught them to pray not before idols, but facing heaven. 2 units at dawn, 2 at dusk, a new rhythm that turned the flow of the day into an act of remembrance. Every gesture, every bow, every whisper of Allahu Akbar was a declaration of freedom hidden within worship. But beneath the calm devotion was the hum of revolution. Each verse that descended carried the quiet defiance of a new world order, a world where the slave stood equal to his master, where the orphan was sacred, and where women were not possessions but souls. The prophet's home became the first sanctuary. Its walls heard the trembling recitation of verses that condemned oppression and called for justice. Those words were sharper than any sword, and soon the merchants and elders of Quraysh began to notice the shift. Their slaves whispered strange phrases. Their sons and daughters spoke of one God. Something unseen was moving through Mecca, and it was unstoppable. But for now it lived in the shadows, nurtured by secrecy, sustained by courage. In the stillness of the night when the world slept, they gathered to recite, "By the morning brightness, and by the night when it grows still, your Lord has not forsaken you, nor has he despised you." The believers wept. The revelation was not just for their prophet, it was for them. A promise, a comfort, a warning. They knew that the peace of secrecy could not last forever. Every prophecy demands its trial. Every truth must face its enemy. If you were among them sitting in that dimly lit room hearing words that no poet had ever spoken, would your heart have believed? Would you whisper the truth, knowing it could cost you everything? Share what you feel, not as opinion, but as witness. Because faith, even when hidden, changes everything it touches. The shadows of Mecca were growing restless. The whispers were about to become a storm. Then came the command. The silence of secrecy ended with a single verse: "Proclaim openly what you are commanded." It was no longer a whisper in the night. It was a call meant to shake the earth. Muhammad stood upon Mount Safa, the sunlight cutting across the stone ridges of Mecca. The people gathered below, traders, elders, slaves, the same city that had once called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He raised his voice. "If I told you that an army stood behind this hill, would you believe me?" They replied, "Yes, for we have never heard you lie." And then the words that would split a civilization in two: "Then I warn you, a great punishment is near." For a heartbeat silence, then chaos. The air cracked with voices of disbelief. Abu Lahab, his own uncle, rose red with fury. "May you perish for this. Is this why you gathered us?" The crowd erupted, laughter, shouting, accusation. The prophet stood firm, his gaze steady. He had spoken the truth, and truth never enters quietly. That day, the city of Mecca turned from him, but heaven turned toward him. It began slowly, a whisper of mockery, a rumor at the marketplace. Then the persecution grew. Those who followed him were dragged through the streets. Men were whipped until their skins split open. Women were beaten until they bled. Among them was Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian slave. They tied him under the sun, a stone crushing his chest, and demanded, "Renounce him." But he only whispered again and again, "Ahad, Ahad." One, only one. His voice, faint and broken, echoed through the desert, and in that sound the idols began to crumble. The Quraysh's empire was built not on faith but profit. Their gods of stone filled their temples with wealth and power. And now one man, one book, not yet complete, threatened it all. Not with armies, but with words. Verses recited softly at night were undoing centuries of worship at dawn. The revelation had become a weapon sharper than any sword. The Quraysh convened in Dar al-Nadwa, their council house. The merchants, the chiefs, the keepers of idols. They sat under the shadow of Hubal, their greatest god, carved from blood-red stone. "His message spreads among our slaves," one said. "Even our own children repeat his verses," another warned. "We cannot allow this. His words make kings and servants equal." They decided to isolate him, to turn his city into his prison. No one would buy from him. No one would sell to him. No one would speak his name without curse or mockery. And yet in the darkness of every boycott, more verses came. Words of patience, words of mercy. Words that promised indeed with hardship comes ease. The prophet did not answer their hatred with hatred. He recited, and each verse descended like a drop of water carving through stone. By the third year of open preaching, the movement had grown beyond control. Former enemies now met in secret to listen. Slaves whispered verses to their masters' sons. Merchants carried fragments of revelation along the trade routes. What began in one cave was now echoing across Arabia. The Quraysh realized too late that their violence only gave the message strength. The more they tried to silence him, the louder the Quran spoke. And so they turned their fury toward his followers. Yasir and Sumaya, an elderly couple, frail yet unbroken. They were dragged into the square, ordered to curse the Prophet. When they refused, they were speared before his eyes. The Prophet could not intervene, he could only whisper to them through tears, "Be patient, O family of Yasir. Your reward is paradise." Their blood became the ink that wrote the story of faith. Each night when the city slept, Muhammad would retreat to the outskirts. He would look upon Mecca from afar, its lights flickering under the weight of idolatry. He did not see enemies. He saw people still enslaved by their own gods, and he prayed for them. For even as they rejected him, the revelation spoke, "We have not sent you but as a mercy to the worlds." The war cry had begun, but it was not the cry of swords. It was the cry of truth against tyranny, the call of the eternal against the temporary. The idols of Mecca still stood tall, but cracks had already appeared beneath their feet. The storm was coming, and with it, a new world. If you had been there standing on that mountain, hearing those words, watching the crowd turn to rage, would you have stood beside him or remained silent among the stones? Speak your reflection. Because every generation faces its own Mount Safa, and every truth still waits to be proclaimed. The whisper had become a cry, but the cry would soon become resistance, and resistance a revolution that would change humanity forever. Every verse descended in rhythm with the rhythm of life itself. When believers were beaten and chained beneath the sun came verses of patience. When the Prophet's heart grew heavy beneath the burden of his mission came verses of mercy and hope. When the city mocked him, the heavens spoke to comfort him. The Quran was not just being revealed, it was alive with them, moving as they moved, breathing as they breathed. Each revelation came like rain upon scorched earth, invisible, unstoppable. And from that rain, hearts began to bloom. Sometimes the verses came in the marketplace as he walked among his enemies. Sometimes they came at night as he prayed until his feet swelled from exhaustion. And when they came, his face would change, his body would tremble, and his companions knew the words of God were descending once again. Revelation was no longer an event. It was a presence, one that walked among men. The desert, the wind, the stars, everything became witness to it. Each verse landed not as philosophy, but as command shaping laws, reforming hearts, and reminding the world of the forgotten covenant between Creator and creation. The first miracle had begun. It was not written in ink, it was written in memory. The Prophet spoke the verses aloud, and those near him absorbed them word for word, breath for breath. Before they ever touched parchment, they were carved into hearts. Men who could not write carried the entire revelation in their souls. They wrote it on palm leaves, smooth stones, and shards of bone, but those were only shadows of the true record, the living memory of humankind. And though their bodies were broken, the words within them remained untouched. Not one letter lost, not one sound forgotten. It was preservation not of paper, but of eternity itself. But revelation invites resistance. The Quraysh saw the change and they feared it. Men once loyal to tribe now bowed only to God. Slaves, merchants, nobles all stood equal in prayer. Such a creed was poison to a society built on lineage and pride. They began to strike harder. They beat those who prayed, starved those who believed, imprisoned those who recited. The Prophet's uncle Abu Talib stood as his shield, protecting him from their rage. But even Abu Talib's influence could not hold back the storm forever. Each act of cruelty birthed a new verse, as if heaven itself was responding to the tyranny of earth. When the Prophet saw his followers suffering, his voice would tremble as he recited, "Do not think that Allah is unaware of what the wrongdoers do. He only delays them until a day when eyes will stare in horror." The words burned hotter than the sun of Arabia. Yet for all their power, these verses carried gentleness. They were not weapons of war, but instruments of transformation. They taught forgiveness where revenge was expected, compassion where hate was deserved. And slowly those who came to mock began to listen. There were nights when silence fell heavy upon the Prophet. No revelation came, And in that stillness he feared that heaven had turned away. But then came the whisper again, "Your Lord has not forsaken you, nor has he despised you." Tears filled his eyes. It was a reminder that the absence of revelation was not rejection, it was preparation. The pause was a test, teaching him patience. The silence was mercy, wrapped in longing. Despite persecution, Islam began to spread beyond Mecca's walls. Travelers carried its verses to distant markets. Merchants whispered its words across the Red Sea. The revelation moved faster than its enemies could contain it. Every verse was a seed planted in the soil of hearts. And even as Quraysh tightened their fists, the seeds began to grow in places they could not reach. The Prophet once said, "This Quran was revealed as guidance and mercy." But for Mecca, it was also a mirror reflecting the decay they had learned to ignore. It spoke against greed, against injustice, against the oppression of the weak. It dismantled every illusion of power and wealth. To those who followed him, the Quran became armor invisible but unbreakable. To those who opposed him, it was a storm they could neither fight nor flee. The revelation had become resistance, and resistance was now faith itself. Each time they tried to silence the recitation, the sound grew louder, echoing through valleys carried by the voices of slaves, children, and women who refused to be silent. If every verse that descended was a test, which one would you have lived through? The verse of patience, of endurance, or of mercy? Not as a story of the past, but as a battle still unfolding within every heart. The Quran was not just teaching them how to survive, it was teaching them how to rise. And soon that rise would shake the empire that ruled them. Because revelation was no longer confined to the hearts of the oppressed. It was beginning to echo across the world. Years passed. The Prophet's voice, once trembling beneath the mountains of Mecca, had fallen silent in the earth. The revelation was complete. But its guardians, the men who carried it in their hearts, were now facing war. The world after the Prophet was fierce and uncertain. Across the Arabian Peninsula, the Ridda Wars erupted, tribes, rebelled empires watched. And on the battlefield of Yamama, the sand turned red. Dozens of those who had memorized the Quran, the Hufaz, living vessels of divine speech, fell one by one. Their tongues that once carried heaven's words were stilled forever. A tremor spread through Medina. Would the Quran die with them? It was Umar ibn al-Khattab who first voiced the unthinkable. He went to Abu Bakr, the first caliph, the man whose heart still carried the echo of the Prophet's last days. "Collect it," Umar said, his voice hard but his eyes filled with dread, "before it is lost." Abu Bakr hesitated. "How can I do what the Prophet himself did not?" he whispered. Umar replied, "By Allah, it is good. For what was revealed for all mankind must not vanish with a generation." That single conversation changed history. It was the moment when divine preservation took human form. Abu Bakr turned to the man who had once written revelation at the Prophet's side, Zayd ibn Thabit. Young, sharp, meticulous. He had heard every verse, seen every revelation descend like light through a storm. Now he was asked to gather it all, every verse spoken in 23 years across cities and generations. Zayd's heart sank. By Allah, if they had ordered me to move a mountain, it would have been easier than this. But still he began. He traveled through the land seeking fragments of the Quran, verses written on palm leaves, flat stones, bones, parchment, and above all, on the living hearts of men. He verified every word twice, once by manuscript, once by memory. If even a single letter's witness was uncertain, it was left aside until proven. For months, the sound of recitation filled Medina. Every reciter, every witness, every syllable was weighed and confirmed. The Quran was being reborn not as a rumor among believers, but as a single unified truth. When the work was done, Zayd stood before Abu Bakr, holding a collection unlike anything before. It was not poetry, not prose, not law, but something greater than all three. The first compilation, As-Sahifa, was complete. From Abu Bakr, it passed to Umar, and after Umar's death, it was entrusted to Hafsa bint Umar, one of the Prophet's widows. In her care, it remained untouched, the heartbeat of revelation preserved within ink and memory. No other scripture had ever been guarded this way. not by scholars in ivory halls, but by the tears and voices of ordinary believers. Every generation became its protector, every prayer its recitation. And though kingdoms would rise and fall, though languages would change and empires crumble, the Quran would remain not just on pages, but on the tongues of millions who could recite it word for word without a single error. The miracle was not that it was written, the miracle was that it could never be erased. Even when fires consumed libraries, when conquerors erased cultures, the Quran survived not as relic, but as rhythm. It lived inside memory, multiplied through breath, carried by every believer who spoke its verses aloud. This was preservation beyond time, the divine promise fulfilled. Indeed, we sent down the reminder, and we will surely preserve it. Each generation became a link in an unbroken chain. From Muhammad to Zayd, from Hafsa to Uthman, from scribe to student, until today, when a child in Indonesia can recite the same words spoken in a cave 14 centuries ago. That is not history. That is eternity speaking through human hearts. Take a breath. Every verse you hear today, every syllable was once written on a fragment of bone, whispered through generations and carried by souls who gave their lives for it. What does preservation mean to you? Because this is how eternity is recorded. The ink had dried, but the revelation still breathed. And soon, one caliph would ensure that no voice, no dialect, and no kingdom could ever divide it again. Years had passed since the prophet's voice had fallen silent, and yet his message had crossed deserts, mountains, and seas. Islam was no longer a whisper in Arabia, it was an empire stretching from Egypt to Persia. New lands, new tongues, new tribes. But with expansion came danger, not of war, but of words. The Quran, once recited in one city, was now recited in 100. Different dialects began to clash. One verse spoken in a northern accent sounded strange to a southerner's ear. Meaning wavered, voices argued. And beneath that uncertainty, a fear began to grow, the same fear Umar once had. Would the word of God, unshaken for decades, now fracture under the weight of men's tongues? Reports reached the Caliph Uthman ibn Affan. In the distant garrisons of Armenia and Azerbaijan, Muslim soldiers argued over the recitation of a single verse. Each insisted that his was correct, each reciting what he had learned from his teacher. But those teachers had learned from different companions from different regions, and their dialects carried the marks of their tribes. When Uthman heard this, he trembled. He stood before the people and said, "If you differ about the Quran now, as the Christians and Jews once differed about their scriptures, then destruction awaits you." And so a decision was made, one that would define the future of faith itself. Uthman summoned once again the man chosen years before, Zayd ibn Thabit. Now older, his hair touched with the dust of time, his heart still engraved with every verse. He was joined by Abdullah ibn Zubair, Sa'id ibn al-As, and Abdur Rahman ibn al-Harith, 4 men chosen for their mastery of the Quran and their purity of speech. Their mission to unify the Quran under one standard, reading the dialect of the Quraysh, the tongue in which revelation had first descended. Day and night they labored. They cross-checked every letter, every verse against the original Sahifa, the manuscript preserved by Hafsa, the prophet's widow. Nothing was written without witness. Nothing was approved without verification. When disagreement arose, Uthman gave a single command: write it in the dialect of Quraysh, for it was revealed in their language. And thus harmony returned to chaos. When the task was complete, Uthman gathered the people. Before him stood several copies, perfect, identical, pure. He ordered that one be kept in Medina and others sent to the great centers of the empire, Mecca, Basra, Kufa, Damascus, and beyond. And then the order that would ignite both fear and awe. All other copies, unverified, uncertain, must be destroyed, not as an act of suppression, but of salvation. To protect unity, they lit the fires. The old parchments curled and turned to ash, while one manuscript, the Uthmanic Mushaf, remained untouched. That day, the Quran became one. From the mountains of Yemen to the shores of Andalusia, the same verses echoed with the same rhythm, the same perfection. Not a word out of place, not a letter lost. Uthman's act was not one of power, but of surrender to the divine promise. Indeed, we have sent down the reminder, and indeed we will guard it. From that moment on, every Quran written, every verse recited traced its lineage back to that single compilation, the Mushaf of Uthman. Even today, 14 centuries later, a child in Istanbul, a scholar in Cairo, a reciter in Jakarta all speak the same words, the same pauses, the same breaths, the same revelation that began in a cave of silence. And though the world changed, kingdoms vanished, empires turned to dust, the Quran did not. Its rhythm endured, carried in the breath of every generation. No book, no empire, no human creation has ever survived untouched for this long. And yet this one born in the sands of Arabia lives unchanged in every corner of the world. What does that say about its origin? Reflect on that truth. Because perhaps eternity does not shout, it recites. The Quran had been unified. But unity was not the end. It was the beginning of another kind of miracle. A miracle that would reach beyond language, beyond time, and reveal signs of knowledge hidden within its very verses. Centuries before telescopes reached the stars, before microscopes touched the unseen, before men could measure time or space, the Quran spoke. It spoke of the birth of the universe, of the formation of life, of truths that no one in the deserts of Arabia could have imagined. And for centuries, these words were heard as poetry, until the modern age arrived and the poetry began to prove itself true. 1400 years ago, a verse said, "Do not those who disbelieve see that the heavens and the earth were once one piece, and we separated them?" At the time, the world believed the heavens were fixed and eternal. No one imagined that all matter, all creation was once a single point. But in the 20th century, science caught up. The Big Bang Theory revealed the very same truth. The universe was once united, then split apart, expanding ever since. What revelation described in a handful of words, human knowledge took millennia to verify. Then came another verse, and we are expanding it. An impossible claim in the 7th century, a fact in the 20th. When Edwin Hubble looked through his telescope and saw galaxies racing away from one another, he confirmed what had already been written, that the universe was not static but alive, growing, breathing. The Quran said, "Have we not made the earth a bed and the mountains as pegs?" At first, the words sounded poetic, but geologists later found that mountains have deep roots anchoring the Earth's crust like stakes. They stabilize the planet, absorbing the tremors of the shifting plates. The Quran had described them not as ornaments, but as foundations. The Earth, it seemed, was designed balanced by weight, structure, and purpose. And then another verse, "And we sent down iron in which is mighty power and benefit for mankind." For centuries, scholars pondered what it meant to send down iron. Only in modern astrophysics did we learn that iron cannot be formed on Earth. Its melting point is too high. It can only be forged in the heart of dying stars, then scattered across the cosmos through supernova. In other words, iron was sent down. A truth hidden within a metaphor revealed by science 1,000 years later. The Quran was not a science book yet. Every word aligned with the pattern of the universe. It spoke in symbols and stories, but within those symbols were the fingerprints of creation. When it said, "We made every living thing from water," no one in the 7th century could have known that the human body, the cell, even the seed of life itself, is mostly made of it. When it said, "He created man from a clinging clot," no one had yet seen the embryo attached to the womb. But now, with microscopes, we see exactly what was described, a clinging substance shaped like a piece of chewed flesh. Another verse declared, "We made the sky a protected roof." The desert people thought the sky was just a ceiling of stars. But now we know it shields us. The ozone layer guards against deadly rays. The atmosphere burns incoming meteors before they strike. Even the magnetic field, unseen, silent, deflects the sun's wrath. Every layer is protection, just as the verse said. And then there was this, "Whoever Allah wills to guide, He opens his heart to Islam, and whoever He wills to lead astray, He makes his chest tight as if he were climbing into the sky." At the time, people laughed. "Who climbs into the sky?" they said. But centuries later, when men reached high altitudes, they found their chests did tighten their breath, growing shallow as oxygen thinned. A spiritual metaphor became a physiological truth. If the words of the Quran describe the cosmos before the telescope, the womb before the microscope, what else might it hold, still waiting to be unveiled? Perhaps revelation and reason were never enemies. Perhaps science is only catching up to what the divine already declared. Share your reflection not to prove, but to wonder. Because faith begins where curiosity refuses to end. And yet beyond its scientific marvels, the Quran held another kind of miracle, one not written in stars or cells, but hidden within its very structure, its rhythm, its symmetry, its perfect mathematics. The Quran was unlike anything the world had ever heard. It was not poetry, yet poets bowed before it. It was not prose, yet scholars could not define it. Its rhythm defied imitation, every syllable alive, every sound carrying the weight of eternity. When the Arabs of the 7th century first heard its verses, they stood stunned. These were a people whose pride was speech, whose words were their crowns, whose poetry was their weapon. And yet when the prophet recited, even the greatest poets, men whose verses could move armies, fell silent. They knew instantly this was not human. Walid ibn al-Mughira, one of Makkah's master poets, once approached the prophet. He expected to hear a man's words, clever rhetoric perhaps. But when he listened to the verses of Surah Fusilat, his face changed, his arrogance melted, and he whispered, "By God, these are not the words of a mortal. They have a sweetness, a beauty, they rise above all that is known." Even his enemies admitted it. They could only call it magic, for how else could mere words pierce the soul so deeply, move the heart so violently, and yet leave the listener in peace? The Quran itself dared the world to replicate it. If you are in doubt about what we have sent down, then produce a surah like it. 14 centuries have passed, and still not one line has been matched. Its power was not in persuasion, it was in resonance. Every verse seemed to vibrate with a force beyond comprehension, its tone shifting from thunder to whisper, from judgment to mercy, as if the voice of creation itself spoke through human tongue. But its miracle was not only in sound, it was in structure. Hidden within its pages lies a symmetry that scholars call tawafuk. In Arabic manuscripts of the Quran, certain words, Allah Rab Rahman, align perfectly across pages, as though the book were folding in upon itself like a mirror. When one page is placed over another, the names of God stand directly opposite, line for line, as if guided by a divine architect. Yet these verses were revealed at different times in different places across 23 years. No human editor arranged them. Still, every repetition, every rhythm forms a pattern too precise to be coincidence. On page after page, the names of the prophets, Ibrahim, Musa, Yusuf, Isa, appear vertically aligned, each positioned with meaning. In one section, the name Yusuf aligns perfectly above the word Jamal, beauty, and indeed Yusuf was known for his beauty. Elsewhere, his name aligns above Aziz, the title he would one day bear in Egypt. It is as if the ink itself obeys the command of heaven. This was more than language, it was architecture in verse, geometry, in sound, mathematics, in meaning. The Quran was written not just to be read, but to be experienced. Even those who do not understand Arabic can feel it. When recited, it stirs something ancient, a memory buried deep in the soul. As if each verse calls back to a promise made before birth, a covenant between creator and creation. And in that moment, language ceases to be human, it becomes the bridge between worlds. Modern scholars have analyzed its rhythm, its syntax, its mathematical frequency. They found balance where balance should not exist, structure where chaos should reign, a harmony that no author could construct consciously. The word day appears 365 times the same as the days in a year. The word sea appears 32 times and land 13 together, the exact ratio of Earth's water and land. These are not coincidences. They are fingerprints, traces of design embedded in revelation. To those who doubt, it is merely coincidence. To those who listen, it is proof. For even without understanding, the recitation of the Quran can draw tears from the eyes of strangers, can make the heart tremble without reason. This is not learned emotion, it is recognition, a soul recognizing its origin. Close your eyes. Listen to one verse, even if you do not understand its meaning. Do you feel it? That vibration in your chest, that trembling in your spirit. That is the same awe the Arabs felt 1400 years ago, and it is the same power that moves millions tonight. Write your reflection below, not as explanation, but as confession. Because sometimes the divine is not meant to be understood, it is meant to be felt. But the Quran's miracles did not end with words. For within its verses lay prophecies, truths that would unfold through centuries, shaping history itself and proving that revelation does not end with time. No other book has been memorized by millions, word for word, breath for breath, without alteration. From Indonesia to Turkey, from Africa to America, every Quran is the same. Not a verse lost, not a syllable changed. Even modern printing errors are caught instantly, not by machines, but by memory, by the living voices of those who know it by heart. When recited, its cadence transcends language. It calms the dying, steadies the frightened, and humbles the powerful. Its sound does not simply fill the air, it fills the soul. It is both message and miracle. The Quran did not merely shape a religion, it reshaped civilization. It became the foundation for law, ethics, and philosophy. It built schools where once there were none, and inspired architecture that mirrored the harmony of its verses. Domes curved like vowels, arches echoing recitation. In Andalusia, it guided scholars to preserve the light of reason when Europe was in darkness. In Baghdad, it gave birth to hospitals, observatories, and libraries, all built by those who believed that seeking knowledge was an act of worship. From algebra to astronomy, calligraphy to cartography, the rhythm of revelation became the pulse of progress. Every culture that touched it was transformed. It bridged deserts and empires, turning wandering tribes into a civilization that reached the edges of the known world. And yet, even as centuries passed, the Quran remained unchanged, unedited, unrevised, eternal. Today, there are over 10 million people who have memorized the Quran entirely. Some are scholars, others children barely old enough to write their names. They recite the same words revealed to Muhammad in a cave 14 centuries ago, the same rhythm, the same melody, the same pauses. In every mosque from Marrakesh to Manila, you could ask any reciter to begin at any verse, and another thousands of miles away would finish it without error. No council decides the text. No priest holds the keys. It is preserved not by power, but by remembrance. Even when printed copies are lost, the book still exists in millions of hearts. It cannot be erased because it never truly left the tongue of humanity. It breathes wherever faith is spoken. Close your eyes and imagine a single verse recited softly at dawn. The sound flows through the walls of an ancient mosque, echoing into alleys, into homes, into the quiet of the human heart. Generations have heard that sound, kings and slaves, scholars and soldiers, each finding something different in its voice, yet all hearing the same truth. The Quran does not ask only to be read, it asks to be remembered. Not as mere text, but as a companion in life and death. When a believer recites it at a grave, it is not the living who speak it, it is eternity whispering through mortal breath. In every age, men have tried to silence it. Empires banned it. Tyrants burned it, skeptics mocked it. But the book that began in the solitude of a cave still endures. Every attempt to erase it only spreads it further. Every challenge to disprove it only deepens its mystery. Its words have outlived conquerors and revolutions. Its message continues to ignite hearts long after armies have turned to dust. Because it was never meant to belong to one people or one time, it was meant to echo until the end of time. And so it remains as it was promised. Indeed it is, we who sent down the reminder, and indeed we will preserve it. The revelation that began with the trembling voice of one man now lives in the chorus of millions. The same words that once lit a cave in Mecca still illuminate hearts across the world. The Quran is more than a book. It is a mirror of creation, a rhythm of mercy, a voice that never fades. You may not understand its language, but if you listen, you will feel its truth, a truth that transcends belief culture and time itself. If you have ever heard its recitation and felt something stir within you that was not coincidence, that was recognition, a reminder from the one who spoke it first. And so as this story ends, remember this: the revelation has never stopped. It continues in every recitation, in every act of remembrance, in every heart that dares to listen. Stay with us after this final chapter, because the message that began in a cave is not finished. It waits quietly for you to hear it again. And so the voice that began in a silent cave still speaks not from the sky, but from within. It whispers in every prayer, in every act of patience, in every person who still believes that words can change the world. The Quran story is not only about revelation, it is about remembrance. It teaches that no moment is wasted, no pain meaningless, no soul forgotten. For those of us who have walked many roads and seen the years pass, this message reaches deeper, that faith is not found in perfection but in endurance. That legacy is not what we leave behind, it is what we pass forward through wisdom, kindness, and memory. Every verse calls us to rise again, to forgive, to learn to seek light even in our final seasons. Because the one who revealed the Quran did not promise an easy path, he promised meaning, and in meaning there is peace. So as this journey ends, let it not end within you. Carry the verse, recite it even in silence. Let it guide you as it has guided millions before you, a lamp for the heart and a bridge to eternity. Stay with us, for the voice that once shook the mountains still has something to say to the soul that listens. 1400 years have passed. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have faded, but one voice has never gone silent. Unburned, unbroken, unchanged, the Quran still stands as it was first spoken, a living echo of the divine promise. Indeed, we sent down the reminder, and we will surely preserve it. This is more than scripture. It is a rhythm that outlives kingdoms, a memory whispered through every generation. At every dawn, from minarets and hearts alike, the same words rise again, the same sound that once filled a lonely cave with light. If this journey stirred something in you, share your reflection below. Not for the algorithm, but as a gesture of remembrance, a voice joining countless others in a chain that never ends. Like this video, if its story reached your heart, subscribe not just to a channel but to a community that still believes knowledge can be sacred. And stay, because the story is not over. For in the next chapter we'll journey beyond the earth, to the stars where revelation once looked down and the heavens once silent spoke again.